You're tuned in to 22 Crime, where the truth hides in the details. Together, we dive into the darkest corners of human nature, exploring the mysteries that have left investigators puzzled and families searching for justice. Because in the world of crime, the truth is never as simple as it seems. With just 22 minutes on the clock, let's dive into today's case and uncover the shocking truth. If you're craving more details after this episode, be sure to check out the full-length version for an even deeper dive into this chilling mystery. The clock is ticking. Let's uncover the truth behind today's mystery. 22 is a true crime podcast that delves into real-life crime stories, which often involve graphic descriptions, sensitive content, and strong language that may not be suitable for all audiences. We strive to present these cases with the utmost respect for the victims and their families. Please note that the content discussed may be distressing or triggering for some listeners. Additionally, all resources and information presented in this podcast are obtained from publicly available internet sources. Listener discretion is strongly advised, and we recommend that only mature audiences proceed with caution. If you are sensitive to such content, please consider watching another video. Stay safe and take care of your mental health. In this episode, we delve into the tragic and complicated case of Sydney Powell, a young woman convicted of the brutal stabbing of her mother, Brenda Powell, in Akron, Ohio. The crime shocked the local community and drew national attention due to its heartbreaking nature and the legal and mental health issues that underpinned it. At the heart of the case is a young woman struggling with severe mental illness, academic pressures, and family dynamics, an all-too-familiar story that led to an unthinkable tragedy. The story of Sydney Powell serves as a crucial window into how the criminal justice system handles cases involving mental illness, especially under the legal framework of the insanity plea. As we navigate through the events leading up to the crime, the court proceedings, and the implications of this case, we will offer an in-depth exploration of the intersection of mental health, legal accountability, and the larger societal implications of these tragic events. Sydney Powell grew up in Akron, Ohio, in what many described as a typical middle-class family. A bright and promising student, Sydney had always been seen as someone with a bright future. Her teachers and peers admired her academic capabilities, and she participated actively in extracurricular activities that enhanced her reputation as an ambitious, hard-working young woman. She appeared to have everything lined up for a successful future: good grades, supportive family, and a clear path to college. However, as we often learn in cases like this, appearances can be deceiving. Beneath Sydney's calm and composed exterior, a storm was brewing. As Sydney moved into young adulthood, the pressures of high academic expectations and personal perfectionism began to weigh heavily on her. Her relationship with her mother, Brenda Powell, though filled with love and mutual respect, was also fraught with unspoken pressures. Brenda was a well-respected child life specialist at Akron Children's Hospital, known for her empathy and dedication to her work. As a mother, she was deeply involved in Sydney's life. Brenda ensured that Sydney had all the resources she needed to succeed academically and personally, attending her school events, celebrating her milestones, and constantly encouraging her to strive for excellence. Yet, what was intended as nurturing support sometimes manifested as high expectations. Brenda's desire to see Sydney achieve her best often translated into mounting pressure for Sydney, who already held herself to high standards. This delicate balance of love and expectation is one that many families struggle with, particularly when a child feels the need to meet or exceed their parents' aspirations. For Sydney, this was compounded by growing internal struggles, battles with anxiety, depression, and a sense of failure that she could not voice, even to her mother. Brenda Powell was a woman deeply committed to helping others, both through her career and in her personal life. Her work as a child life specialist involved supporting children and families during medical crises, providing them with both emotional and practical assistance. This was more than just a job for Brenda, it was a calling. She had a gift for bringing comfort to those in need, and was known for her tireless work ethic, compassion, and ability to navigate difficult emotional terrain with grace. At home, Brenda applied the same level of dedication to her role as a mother. She invested her time and energy in ensuring Sydney had a stable and nurturing environment. To outsiders, the Powell family seemed idyllic. Friends and neighbors saw a close bond between mother and daughter. Brenda's colleagues admired her work ethic, and Sydney was seen as a bright, ambitious young woman. However, as Sydney entered college, the relationship between mother and daughter began to show signs of strain. Sydney's academic struggles became a focal point of tension in the household. The pressure to succeed was compounded by Sydney's internalized feelings of inadequacy, as she began to struggle under the weight of expectations, both from herself and from her family. While Sydney's life appeared promising on the surface, her mental health was in steady decline. The pressures of excelling academically in college, combined with her inability to meet her own and her mother's expectations, pushed her deeper into a state of depression and anxiety. Mental health professionals agree that the transition from high school to college can be one of the most challenging times for young adults. The shift from a structured environment to one that demands increased independence can exacerbate underlying mental health issues, especially when coupled with personal and familial expectations. In Sydney's case, her struggles were further intensified by her tendency to internalize her emotions. As her academic performance began to slip, she withdrew from social circles, isolating herself from friends and even her family. The Sydney who had once been described as bright, outgoing, and ambitious, now appeared irritable, withdrawn, and overwhelmed. However, despite these obvious changes, her mental health struggles remained largely unaddressed. It was as if Sydney was silently drowning in her own turmoil, with no clear lifeline in sight. What makes this case even more tragic is that Sydney's mental health deterioration was not recognized in time to prevent the disaster that would later unfold. Mental health experts often stress the importance of early intervention in treating anxiety and depression, particularly in young people. However, in Sydney's case, the signs of her struggles were either misunderstood or overlooked, allowing her condition to worsen without proper treatment or support. The stigma surrounding mental health likely played a role in Sydney's reluctance to seek help. Many young adults fear that admitting to mental health challenges will be seen as a sign of weakness or failure. This fear can prevent them from reaching out for the support they desperately need. In Sydney's situation, the fear of disappointing her mother or being perceived as a failure may have contributed to her silence. As Sydney's mental health continued to deteriorate, the tension between her and Brenda grew more palpable. Brenda, concerned for her daughter's future, became increasingly involved in trying to help Sydney get back on track academically. However, her attempts to help often added to the pressure Sydney felt. Brenda's well-meaning suggestions, such as seeking academic support or exploring alternative career paths, felt like judgments to Sydney. What was intended as encouragement felt like criticism, deepening the divide between them. The arguments between mother and daughter became more frequent. Sydney, feeling trapped between her own expectations and her mother's, lashed out verbally during these confrontations. Meanwhile, Brenda, confused by Sydney's increasing hostility and worried about her declining academic performance, struggled to understand what was happening to her daughter. Neither of them could fully articulate the emotional and psychological strain that was driving their relationship into a downward spiral. In the months leading up to the fateful day, Sydney's behavior became more erratic. Friends and family noticed a change in her demeanor, describing her as more agitated and distant. While it was clear that something was wrong, the full extent of Sydney's mental health issues remained hidden, even from those closest to her. The combination of academic pressures, mental health struggles, and familial tensions created a perfect storm, one that would culminate in the tragic events of March 3, 2020. March 3, 2020, started like any other day in the Powell household, but it would soon descend into horror. Brenda had taken the day off from work to spend time with Sydney, hoping to have a serious discussion about Sydney's academic future. This was not the first time they had talked about Sydney's struggles, but Brenda was determined to find a way to help her daughter regain her footing. What began as a conversation intended to support Sydney quickly escalated into an argument that would have devastating consequences. Sydney had been placed on academic probation by her university, a fact that weighed heavily on her. When Brenda brought up Sydney's grades and suggested seeking additional academic help, Sydney's frustration boiled over. She felt cornered, as though there was no way out of her situation. The conversation, which had started with good intentions, spiraled into a heated confrontation. Both mother and daughter were speaking from places of deep emotional pain, Brenda out of concern for her daughter's future, and Sydney from a place of fear, anger, and overwhelming stress. At this moment, the phone rang. It was the university, calling to inform Brenda of Sydney's academic probation. Brenda's face grew tense as she listened to the news. When she relayed the information to Sydney, the tension in the room reached a breaking point. Sydney felt as though her world had collapsed. In her mind, she had failed completely, not just in school, but as a daughter. In a moment of uncontrollable rage and despair, Sydney grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter. What followed was a brutal and violent attack. Brenda, completely caught off guard, was unable to defend herself. The scene in the Powell household shifted from one of emotional tension to one of unimaginable horror, as Sydney inflicted fatal injuries on her mother. A neighbor, hearing the commotion, called the police. When officers arrived at the Powell residence, they found Brenda gravely injured and Sydney in a state of shock. Sydney, disoriented and unresponsive, was taken into custody, while emergency responders attempted to save Brenda. Tragically, their efforts were in vain. Brenda Powell succumbed to her injuries at the scene. The immediate aftermath of the crime was one of chaos and disbelief. Those who knew the Powell family were shocked by the news. How could such a tragic and violent act occur in a family that seemed so loving and supportive? The police investigation revealed the depths of Sydney's mental health struggles, but the brutal nature of the crime left many in the community searching for answers. Sydney was arrested and charged with the murder of her mother. As she sat in police custody, her mental state remained fragile. The young woman who had once been seen as a promising student with a bright future now faced the possibility of spending the rest of her life behind bars. However, as the legal process began, it became clear that this case was not just about a horrific crime, it was also about the complexities of mental illness and how the criminal justice system handles cases where mental health is a significant factor. When Sydney Powell's case went to trial, her defense team entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. This legal strategy was based on the argument that Sydney was not in control of her actions at the time of the crime due to her severe mental health struggles. The insanity plea is one of the most controversial defenses in the legal system, often misunderstood by the public and difficult to prove in court. The prosecution, on the other hand, sought to portray Sydney's actions as deliberate and calculated. They argued that the attack was the result of pent-up anger and resentment, not a mental breakdown. The prosecution emphasized the brutal nature of the crime, presenting graphic evidence that showed the extent of Brenda Powell's injuries. They painted a picture of a young woman who had chosen to commit murder in a fit of rage, rejecting the notion that mental illness had played a decisive role. The defense countered by calling upon a team of mental health experts to testify about Sydney's psychological state leading up to the attack. Dr. Elaine Mitchell, a renowned psychiatrist who had evaluated Sydney, provided key testimony. Dr. Mitchell diagnosed Sydney with major depressive disorder and generalized anxiety disorder, conditions that had worsened significantly in the months before the crime. At the time of the incident, Dr. Mitchell testified, Sydney Powell was in the midst of a severe mental health crisis. Her depression and anxiety had escalated to the point where she could no longer control her actions or understand the consequences of those actions. This was not an act of calculated violence. It was the result of a profound psychological breakdown. The defense argued that Sydney's mental illness, compounded by the intense pressures she faced, had driven her to a breaking point. They contended that Sydney was experiencing a psychotic episode when she attacked her mother, and that she could not be held fully responsible for her actions. The prosecution, however, challenged this narrative by presenting their own mental health experts. These experts argued that while Sydney may have experienced anxiety and depression, her mental state did not absolve her of responsibility for the crime. They contended that Sydney was capable of making rational decisions, and that the attack was driven by anger, rather than a psychotic break. The trial was emotionally charged, with both sides presenting compelling arguments about Sydney's state of mind. The jury was faced with the difficult task of weighing the evidence. On one hand, the brutality of the crime, and on the other, the question of whether Sydney's mental health struggles had impaired her ability to control her actions. In the end, the jury returned a verdict of manslaughter, acknowledging that while Sydney was responsible for her mother's death, her mental illness had played a significant role in the crime. The judge sentenced Sydney to serve time in a mental health facility, where she would receive the treatment she so desperately needed. While the verdict brought some closure to the legal proceedings, it left lingering questions about the intersection of mental illness and criminal culpability. How does the justice system balance compassion for those struggling with mental illness against the need for accountability? The case of Sydney Powell became a flashpoint for these broader discussions, raising important questions about how society handles mental health crises and whether the legal system is equipped to address the complexities of such cases. The case of Sydney Powell underscores several critical issues related to mental health, both within the criminal justice system and in society at large. First and foremost, it highlights the importance of early intervention in mental health care. Sydney's mental health struggles had been evident for some time, yet they were not adequately addressed. The pressures she faced, from her academic responsibilities, her personal expectations, and her relationship with her mother, were allowed to build without proper support, ultimately leading to a tragedy that might have been avoided with timely intervention. This case also brings attention to the stigma surrounding mental health, particularly for young adults. For many individuals, admitting to mental health struggles can feel like an admission of failure. Sydney, who had always been seen as a high achiever, likely felt that seeking help would mean disappointing her mother and those around her. This fear of being seen as weak or incapable is a significant barrier that prevents many people from seeking the mental health care they need. Additionally, the case raises important questions about the insanity plea and the broader role of mental health in the legal system. While the insanity defense is a crucial legal tool for cases where mental illness plays a central role, it remains one of the most misunderstood aspects of criminal law. Many people believe that the insanity plea is a way to escape responsibility for a crime, but in reality, it is a complex and difficult defense to prove. Sydney's case demonstrated the challenges of using the insanity plea as a defense and highlighted the need for a more nuanced understanding of how mental illness affects behavior and decision-making. Amid the legal battles and the discussions about mental health, it is essential to remember the life of Brenda Powell, a woman who was more than just a victim of a tragic crime. Brenda's life was marked by her dedication to helping others, both in her professional role at Akron Children's Hospital and in her personal life as a loving mother. She touched the lives of countless families, offering support and guidance during some of their most challenging moments. Her death left a profound void, not only in the lives of her family and friends, but also in the broader community she served. In the wake of her passing, several initiatives were created in Brenda's memory, ensuring that her legacy of compassion and kindness would continue to impact the lives of others. Her dedication to helping children and families in crisis remains a lasting testament to the person she was, a person who cared deeply about the well-being of others, and whose influence extended far beyond her immediate family. In the aftermath of the trial, the Powell family faced the long and painful process of healing. The loss of Brenda was devastating, and the fact that Sydney was responsible for her mother's death only added to the emotional toll. Counseling and support services became crucial for the family as they navigated their grief and tried to come to terms with the enormity of what had happened. For Sydney, the focus shifted toward rehabilitation. In the mental health facility where she was sentenced, Sydney underwent intensive therapy aimed at addressing her underlying mental health issues. This treatment included medication management, regular psychiatric evaluations, and therapy sessions designed to help her process the trauma she had experienced and the events that had led to her mother's death. The goal of her rehabilitation was not only to serve her sentence, but also to heal the wounds caused by her mental illness. On a broader scale, Sydney Powell's case became a catalyst for discussions about reform within the criminal justice system. Mental health advocates, legal professionals, and policymakers began to push for changes that would ensure individuals like Sydney receive the mental health care they need before their struggles escalate to the point of crisis. Proposed reforms included better training for law enforcement officers in handling mental health crises, the establishment of specialized mental health courts, and increased funding for mental health services in schools and communities. One of the most significant lessons to emerge from this case is the need for greater mental health awareness, particularly for young adults. The pressures faced by young people today, academic, social, and familial, can be overwhelming, and without adequate support, these pressures can lead to devastating outcomes. Sydney's story is a stark reminder of the importance of early intervention and the need for mental health care that is accessible, compassionate, and stigma-free. The tragic case of Sydney Powell and the death of her mother, Brenda Powell, is a poignant reminder of the complexities of mental health and the far-reaching consequences when it goes unaddressed. This story is not just about a single act of violence, it is about the failures of a system that did not provide the support Sydney needed before it was too late. It is about the stigma that surrounds mental illness and the fear that prevents so many from seeking help when they need it most. As we reflect on this case, we are reminded of the urgent need for mental health awareness and early intervention. We are reminded of the importance of compassion and understanding within the criminal justice system, particularly when dealing with individuals whose actions are driven by mental illness. And we are reminded of the legacy of Brenda Powell, a woman whose life was defined by her kindness, her dedication to helping others, and her deep love for her family. Thank you so much for listening all the way through. If you've made it to this point, drop a comment with the word "done," and we'll give you a personal shout-out to show our appreciation. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive in this murder and media frenzy. It was as fascinating for us to create as we hope it was for you to hear. If you found this episode thought-provoking, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. We also invite you to join our YouTube channel, where we can answer your questions directly and share exclusive members-only content. We'd love to know what you think about this case. Was justice truly served? Share your opinions in the comments below. We're always eager to hear your thoughts. For those wanting to explore more on true crime, we've included an Amazon affiliate link to some of the books we referenced in our research. Purchasing through the link won't cost you anything extra, but it will support the channel and help us continue bringing you more content. If you're craving even more, consider joining our Patreon community. As a member, you'll get access to the full script of this episode, exclusive book summaries, and even the complete set of images featured in this case, available for purchase in our Patreon store. This has been 22 Crime. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.